Thanks for coming to today's panel. We realized there weren't terribly many panels about audiences, which is rather fascinating during MIPCOM. And I thought it's good for all of us to get the focus back on who we're producing these shows for, where and how to tap into it, right? Yeah, I see somebody nodding, the pain points continue. Before we get into the meat of it, can I just check, how many in the room are producers? So we got a lot of producers, good. You can pitch after. And how many are sales agents or distributors? Also, so you got a dual role, hybrid as they say. And how many of you have a checkbook for funding, commissioning and funding? One person, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, all the producers, notice who they are. So we have a target. Okay, and may I ask another few? How many of you are from Canada? Okay, good, because it's aimed at an international audience, but I was just checking if there were other Canadians in the room. And lastly, any of you streamers? Fast channels, SVOD, AdVOD, TVOD. Okay, so you'll be definitely focused on the audience. Okay, well today we're having a discussion on how to leverage data from across all these different platforms. Where you can get it, is sometimes you can't get it. And what are the opportunities and tools available to kind of tap into it and go a step further. A quick introduction of our panel. Jolie Collins is a Gemini award-winning producer. Gemini is the Canadian Emmy, if you like. And she did a low-budget web series some years ago called Coded Drama, 6 times 8-minute episodes. And you know, with web series, it really matters to develop an audience and a following. She won all sorts of awards at WebFest, etc., and lost only to the BBC at a recent award, but they had more resources. And the interest is repackaging the web series with the audience success to, as some of you are already doing, into a full-length series on TV. We have Agnes Augustin, the CEO and president of the Shaw Rocket Fund. Shaw is a massive telecom in Canada, but this is an independent fund, largest private funder in Canada, for children's media aimed at indie producers. So Agnes also has been kind of groundbreaking visionary in a fairly conservative Canada over the past dozen years, moving into digital and other platforms and helping bring children's content onto the world stage, both directly in sales and production, but also co-productions with Europe. So that becomes quite interesting, show me the money. And we have Moira Roger here, who is herself a television producer, working since the late 90s. She launched Magnify Digital, which is not the same as Magnify Media, a company in the UK. Magnify Digital is over a dozen years ago, specialized long before it was fashionable in audience development, finding it, tracking it, trying to lever it, training in tech. And they are, in the past 3 years, they pioneered this tool, which we'll tell you about, called Screen Miner, to help track audiences along the way, but it's aimed at producers and funders and broadcasters, so broadcaster streamers. Essentially, everyone is watching, as we all know, TV and film, web series everywhere, not just TVOD, SVOD, AdVOD, fast channels, not just television, but on Facebook, TikTok, social media platforms. It's everywhere, whether in full form or part form. And it's a staggering task to figure out who's watching what where, and even yet to consolidate it or bring it together. And producers and platforms don't want to leave the views on the table or underreport or underestimate the value of the audiences. So in the past, as you all know, we were stuck with ratings systems, and that was one of the only measures. And more recently, we were able to get data, for example, if it was revenue share licenses with AdVods or TVODs, you'd get a little bit of data here, you'd get data from YouTube, Facebook, but you couldn't get the overview. I would like to get each of you on the panel to just kind of tell us your perspective selfishly on the pain point around data before we figure out some angles that might help. By the way, there is room for questions at the end, and there'll be a kind of mingle around after as well. So maybe from the producers, Jolie, perhaps you could start. What are the issues? Like, why would you care about the data per se? You're a producer, you're a creator.
Yeah, so reporting is something that's becoming required from the funders, and I'm a producer, I'm not a data expert, and producers are already wearing many, many hats, and I felt like, oh great, this is one more hat I have to wear.
In your spare time.
Yeah, I'm gonna become a data expert. But going in and really trying to find the places where the audiences were engaging and viewing data was something I just didn't really want to have to do, to be honest with you. But I also didn't want to miss an opportunity to find out where was my audience really watching my content. And I also wanted to know where my marketing dollars were going. As an independent producer, I'm working on very limited marketing budgets, and so I don't want to be missing out on opportunities and, or spraying and praying and hoping that I'm reaching an audience. So I realized that this was a really important skill set that I needed to learn. Yeah.
What did you have to do before? Like, what's the big deal about getting data? You had to go into different sites, or what was the process?
So when I produced Coded, it was my first time I had data working with digital media content, and so I had to log into all of my social media platforms, Google Analytics, ad campaigns, and learn how to read the data. And of course, every platform views or shows the data differently. And I found the whole process, to be honest, incredibly overwhelming. And it was, again, not something I was really passionate about, so yeah.
And what about from the agency perspective, Moira?
Yeah, on our agency side, we've seen that producers haven't been invited into the audience development process. And so they come on our agency side, and they're looking for help for us to help them figure out who to target in the earliest stages, to build a strategy and execute the strategy, and then to report out on it. And of course, the data is central to everything we do in that process. We always say if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And that was one of the reasons why we ended up building ScreenMinder, because as an agency, we were living the same problems that Jolie has just described.
And what about from the, funder perspective? Canada is unique, for those of you that don't know it. They're spending over $1 billion in funding. Some countries, like where I live in Holland, doesn't do that. But Canada is in a privileged.
We spend more.
You spend more.
Well,
so tell us.
So we, as a funder, actually in 2021, Canadian content was about $2.6 billion.
Wow.
Is what was spent, but then from the funding standpoint, it's about 1.1.
Okay.
But in the Rocket Fund, we've invested to date about $275 million in kids content, about 1,100 different types of projects. And from a funding perspective, it used to be that, you got a second season from a broadcaster, and then you went, okay, it's working. And so, and that's basically how we knew, other than it was selling globally, and then we were able to see that and I always say that if we're making a return on investment, that means kids around the world are watching our shows. But measurement became very difficult when all kids, our content's online mostly now. And so how do you actually know then? You have a web series, you have shorts, and in children's we do all different types of experiences. And so where are the kids? So we started doing audience development, one of the first funds to say we want discoverability plans is what we call them. And producers would say, well, that's the broadcaster's job.
Oh yeah, right? That's a universal thing.
And we went back and went, not anymore, because if you're gonna drive your audience, you're gonna have to know where they are today and where kids are today and how are you gonna find them.
Another hat to wear.
But there's a lot of reasons why producers should be involved in the process, because you can usually start earlier, you know your product better than anyone else. You can start earlier than the broadcasters, you can sustain between seasons, and ultimately we see that producers are being asked to produce the assets anyway and not getting the data. So it's really important more and more, and we're seeing more collaboration desired on the part of broadcasters, I think, in Canada, to draw producers into the whole audience development effort.
Just before we go deeper into that, isn't it also something that maybe producers are concerned about? Like, would you use the data against them? A project's not doing well, so we're not funding you. Hello?
Fear, lots of fear around audience. Well, the reality is we have to know where the audience is today. So we can't be afraid of the, you didn't get any views, so you're not gonna get another season. Frankly, if you didn't get any views, then you shouldn't be getting another season. And that sounds perhaps harsh, but it's true. And what we've discovered is that by having the producer proactive, and we're part of that process in helping, that we partnered with, 3 of our funds partnered with toolkits on how to help producers be able to do to be able to set the stage basically ahead of time. And many producers have come back and said that it actually really helped them plan and be able to be more successful. So that creates hopefully less fear around, and then also pivot. So be able to pivot as they were creating their content, so that they were actually finding their audience, and you know, it's what does the audience want, and make sure that they're delivering that.
Right. And I think, well, from my perspective in VOD and streaming world, the bigger platforms, of course, like a Netflix or Amazon, have access to the data, but they, depending on your deal negotiating strength, don't love to share it. Whereas the smaller and mid-sized streamers do have the data and often pay based on rev share or similar models, but it's not a standardized way of reporting that you can draw conclusions from, and it's often around money rather than trends or appetites for programming. So I guess we're here to look at, and the traditional broadcasters were kind of sticking data into research departments for marketing or sales. So too many wings. I'm interested to know what's happened, like why we're talking about Canada here, what solutions you've arrived at, and could they export to overseas?
Yeah, in 2020, we got together 60 industry leaders across Canada, and we wanted to explore and discuss how technology and audience might combine to strengthen the Canadian sector. And it was a phenomenal turnout. Agnes was part of those, an instrumental part of those early discussions. And we heard a few key themes. One was there was a desire for standardized reporting and standardized data sets. There was the participants felt there was value in building a national database. We don't have, even with the staggering numbers that are put into curating original content, we weren't looking at audience ROI. We don't have any national database, which you know, is somewhat common to many countries around the world. And without that database, we weren't able to come up with benchmarks. So when I was producing television, I was told that if we got 1 million views, the network would call in the morning and say, the morning after, that you did 1 million or you did 1.2 million, and you'd think, okay, I crossed that threshold. But it's such a blunt way of measuring audiences and measuring success, because of course certain types of projects get, you know, a primetime scripted series it has the potential to get much more viewership than, you know, in Canada, a niche Indigenous one-off documentary that I also produced. You're just not going to get 1 million views, but it's still very significant and important programming. So that's really how this whole thing came about. And then in 2021, Agnes at the Shaw Rocket Fund, along with the TELUS Fund and Bell Fund, joined forces in what I think was kind of an unprecedented collaboration to pilot some solutions around audience development.
Yeah, and I would imagine it's increasingly important to slice and dice by genre and format. You know, a health documentary on COVID is going to be a different thing than a Nordic crime show, and each are valid, but their benchmarking is going to be different, and you may find the formats that are on the web or streamers are overperforming versus what's on linear television, or now with fast channels, that line is blurring as well. So I think it's a really interesting point. Agnes, what did you feel about the solution? Was three funds working together, is that unusual? Like, aren't you usually competing, or?
No, we're Canadian. No, it's the private funds. So we have quite a few different types of funds in Canada, and really what we all do is we fund production. I always like to say that. So you know, out of our money, we're able to put some into discoverability. But really, what we do in Canada, we have a lot of money, but it all goes to production, and then that's it. I would say, and then what? You know, like, how are you actually going to get your audience? And we haven't spent a lot of our resources on audience. So what we decided as the private funds, and even though we're the smaller funds collectively, we have access to the collaboration allowed us to expand our thinking and be able to almost set the stage for some of the bigger players in the country. And so that, I mean, it's a requirement. It's interesting that we're regulated by the CRTC, and we actually have to measure our success, but nobody gives resources. So it was, how do we actually do this? And so the three funds got together, and Moira came up with a solution, and we were excited about being part of that, and hopefully making it bigger and global. That's the plan.
Right. So, and in Europe, depending on the country you're in, depending on the country you're in Europe, there will be some funds thrown at audience or discoverability, but they're not consolidated and rather piecemeal. So it's difficult, for example, in co-productions. Canada does, of course, a lot of co-productions, as does Europe, and being able to track also different languages. I think the Screen Miners in French as well as
Screen Miners in French and English right now.
Yeah, okay, for now, so that's good. Anyway, maybe it's good to dig in to see a little bit about how it works. Perhaps you could tell us, Moira, what is specific in this tool.
Yeah, so the difference with Screen Miner is that we're not competitive to a Parrot Analytics or any of the rating systems. What we are is an aggregator of audience data across multiple platforms. And the key differentiator is we're working with first-party data, so data that relates specifically to the project. We're not estimating, we're not listening to social media and extrapolating what we think is demand or anything like that. There's lots of great platforms that do that. ScreenMiner is really about, there's two sides to it. There's a creator side and then there's the enterprise side. And what it enables creators to do is link any of their owned accounts, whether it's Google Analytics or Facebook ads, Google ads, Facebook, just organic, Instagram, Vimeo, YouTube, and it pulls all that data in passively. So that immediately means that you're saving a ton of time, and also when that work is done manually, the opportunity for error, no matter how careful you are, we're not data entry people, so it removes a lot of the opportunity for error. And then what we've also got going on, which is super exciting and a first in Canada, is we're now working with some of our broadcasters who are providing data directly to the platform. So we're uploading it in the back through a CSV. And that's super exciting because what's happening now, and Joey, you spoke to this a little bit, is that the funders are asking they want that broadcast data or streaming data. And the producer kind of winds up between mom and dad saying, okay, they go to their platform saying, we need audience data. And they say, we're not giving you audience data. So they go back to the funder and say, well, we can't get the audience data. Well, we want the audience data, go back and get it. And so there was this, back and forth going on, which we're eliminating by the cooperation from these broadcasters, which is super exciting. But I think that we're all visual people and we like watching content. So I'm going to play a video because that's probably the fastest way for you to get a sense of what ScreenMiner is all about.
Audiences today watch more content more often on more platforms. They binge, they share, and they leave a trail. Data is buried on each platform that reveals how film, TV, and web content is connecting with audiences. The problem is, gathering all that data from multiple sources takes time, and each manual step creates the potential for error. Introducing ScreenMiner, a new audience analytics platform that aggregates data from multiple sources and visualizes it to provide instant meaning. In minutes, creators set up their projects and link their social media, video sharing, Google Analytics, digital advertising, and other accounts so data flows effortlessly into the ScreenMiner database. Other data can be added too, such as broadcast or streaming views, game and app downloads, and even qualitative data like awards and reviews. Videos are easily tagged using ScreenMiner's proprietary system so data can be tracked by category. Curious which director or talent drives the most views? Needing to report total reach for sponsored content? No problem. ScreenMiner crunches the numbers and delivers interactive charts that make the data make sense. Customizable benchmarks show how projects are performing relative to similar content. Add dates for key milestones to see which marketing tactics are working best to build audiences. When it comes time to share results, ScreenMiner lets creators file slick audience reports with the click of a button. Over on the enterprise side of ScreenMiner, funders, broadcasters, and other organizations can see data for individual projects where they can instantly access the relative reach, engagement, and cost per view for their entire portfolio. ScreenMiner, dig your data, build your audience. To learn more, visit screenminer.com.
Well, that helps to visualize it indeed. Jolie, just going specifically to your project, for example, I don't know, coded, what happened there? How did it change what you were doing?
Well, it helped me to really see benchmarks and get very specific with the data, episode views, and it actually became really exciting for me as I began to learn how to read the data. I recently relaunched the web series with a new marketing approach, and it's reaped huge benefits because I'm able to get very specific in how I want to target my audience. And as a producer, it's also great to get very specific about who is my audience, right? So I've really learned the data is really providing a lot of incredible, useful information that I completely missed before.
Yeah.
And also, it really, for me as a producer, it's put me in the driver's seat. Essentially, this platform has given me a blueprint of the success of my show. So I'm really able to see opportunities. As a producer, I think it's incredible.
What do you mean, like, you were telling me at a break over coffee that all of the money at the beginning went into the production and there wasn't a whole lot left for pivoting attention.
There never is, Wendy.
I gotta say though, like hats off to Agnes and some of the
Yeah.
funders in Canada that are actually putting their money where their mouth is. They're not just putting more downward pressure on producers saying you've gotta, become marketeers. They're saying we're gonna support you with tools
Yeah.
and we're gonna support you with money for it. And I think that's, I'm not sure how much that's happening around the world.
Yeah, and also, in support of this, what we've done, the 3 funds, is we basically partnered with Magnify and we're giving producers licenses for ScreenMiner as part of our service to them.
So they don't pay.
So they don't pay.
Yeah.
And so right now we've supported over 100 productions
Yeah, there's over
between the
100
3 of us that will be on the platform and that will be launching, depending on timing. But that was something that we felt was really important as well, because you can't, to your point, you can't just say deliver and there's no resources. So we have to try to do our part to help the producers.
But
And
have
it's
you-
centralized. It's centralized all in one location. I mean, that makes it so, I'm not logging into each platform separately to read different sets of data.
And when you say platform, you don't mean a VOD
Social-
platform, you mean
social media
or
platforms and Google Analytics, yeah.
Okay. All right, but can you see, when you see data and there's, let's say, 8 episodes, by episode 3, can you make a change in something? Marketing, promotion, like what does the data, is it passive retroactive, or can you go, oh crap, I should put more marketing effort?
Yeah,
into
I could say, why is no one watching episode 3? Okay, well, I can do a specific ad campaign that targets that episode and then bolster the views on that episode. So it's
Remind people to go back
Yeah.
and continue watching, yeah.
Mhm.
You can kind of see here on this chart, this is something we pulled out of Coded. So this is the engagements for post-containing videos. and you can see the $2 signs. You're able to layer on when your key marketing activities. So that indicates, if this was live, you'd roll over and then remind yourself that that was the launch of a YouTube campaign. And while we can't say the YouTube campaign caused increased engagement, you can see correlations. So that's the kind of, we're striving to make the data as simple as possible. No one had a sharper learning curve when it came to audience data than me. I was living it. I was a producer. I wasn't a data person. It was just out of necessity that we really wanted to build this platform. But we're trying to make it as simple as possible, so you don't have to go and get your data science degree in order to use the platform.
Yeah. It's also really helpful to know what social media platforms where's your audience? Like, you may think that they're all on YouTube, but maybe they're actually on Facebook or TikTok, and it allows you to see this, so you can really target your marketing dollars towards that particular social media platform to promote your show.
And it's interesting because one of the comments that has been made to me is, well, who cares? I mean, social media views, are they really that relevant compared to what we're getting on the streaming platform? But when you looked at that AdVod panel yesterday, and a fabulous woman who had it was just a great presentation, she said, social media, videos watched on social media now, across social media equal online digital platform viewing for video. So I mean, it shouldn't be discounted. And the idea of underreporting as a producer, not being able to say, that we got this many views of episodes, but also the complementary content that's created to promote or drive further engagement. That's something else we're able to pick up. If you don't mind, Wendy, I'll just take a moment to say, like, this is something we've seen particularly with the TELUS Fund. Now, TELUS supports health content, health and well-being content, and they require, quite a repository of assets, a large repository of assets to be created, because they know it helps drive engagement and maintain engagement. It's useful for visibility. But some of that complementary content, first of all, it can be as expensive as producing the core content, and so producers obviously sometimes get left holding the bag on those expenses because they're not planned for early enough. But they actually drive meaningful engagement. And we were involved with a show a few years ago about addiction, and the purpose of this show was to reduce the stigma around addiction. So they created a lot of short vignettes that served the same purpose. It was serving the same agenda. Those vignettes far exceeded the viewership that was achieved by the broadcast documentary. And so for a producer to not get credit for those views and that reach and engagement that they're driving for the shorter form content, just doesn't seem right. So that's something else we're really focused on right now, examining the role of that kind of what we call complementary content to engage audiences.
And you can maybe talk a bit about the kids producers that are driving that would be great if you could just touch on that.
Well, the kids producers are among the most sophisticated, and they're pushing us. I was saying, the platform has been very complicated to build, and now that producers are using it, especially the kids producers, they're pushing us and they're saying, well, can you add merchandising SKUs for the merch that we're selling, and can you include podcasts, and they've been great. We had a kids show actually that was a scripted, very, very expensive scripted drama, and they created a lot of ancillary content. And that content deepened the story world, and again outstripped some of the episodic viewership. So,
and yet, what about the just linear broadcasters? They're starting to open up and accept this. Obviously, like the CBC you were mentioning, which is
CBC's been great. They're providing data now for their French streaming platform 2TV, as well as CBC Gem. It took us a long time to negotiate that deal, and we're just starting to add that data. So we'll put that we'll upload that in the back end, and then that data is very carefully flagged. We've developed a new feature to show that to remind everyone that it's confidential. So nothing has changed. When that data was provided informally, you're still obliged through your long-form agreements in Canada that you can't share that confidential data. Now we're just sharing it and reminding people that they can't share it beyond their own team.
closed circle.
Yeah, and I do want to add too that having the funders involved early on also I would say helped, just because, again, the biggest fear was if the numbers weren't high enough, then we would not fund. And even though I said earlier, we really want to support the development of audience and work with the broadcasters and the platforms so that we're all successful.
And that's the understatement of the year. Having the funders involved has been everything in driving this change, because we, as a private company, it's my passion. This is, we've made a significant investment, but let's face it, we're not gonna get the CBC to start providing data to us unless the funders got involved, because it's a lot different when they come to the table. They're putting millions and millions of dollars behind programming for these platforms, and that's a much greater motivator. So the collaboration in Canada has been everything.
The velvet hammer of the funder. We ask for data, you better give it, but we'll keep it confidential somewhere else on this other platform. Yeah, but I still don't, I was still struggling, because I'm not in the field, I was struggling to know the difference between, 50 other similar sounding audience type platforms, the Parrot and the analytics. Like, you were saying that yours is not based on estimates or not? Can you explain that?
It's all, so my understanding of Parrot and Diesel Labs is that they are, they're scanning the social media signals to show audience demand and to help refine targeting. There's a lot of good value, I think, that some of those platforms deliver. But at a certain point, you have to look and see what's the real data, what's happening and what's actually happening, what are we actually measuring, and how are we pivoting? Like when you see, as Jolie said, your viewership is dipping, or your viewership just isn't, for certain episodes, isn't there on certain platforms. You might want to either bolster it or double down on the platforms where you do have an engaged audience.
And are there situations where the content that you make is changing, like a broadcaster saying, well, actually we want now, well, if you look at Arte in France, they would do a linear story, but also fund or support non-linear side, second screen stuff, web series, etc. Are you doing that in TELUS, and are you supporting like that one episode is for one platform and others are for linear? Is it really fine-tuned like that?
At the Rocket Fund, we're in children's content, so we've been on all platforms for a long time.
Right.
And so, what our producers have been doing, and again, where the resources are limited, it's really hard. How do you? I'm answering this question.
Yeah, no.
But is what we've seen. Some of our producers have been creative, where they get, we don't do 13.5 hours anymore, but whatever, if we did 10 episodes, we would then finance 11 episodes, and the 11th episode would actually be the shorts and the social media and all the extra pieces, so it would fall under the linear funding, or it would be lumped in as part of the overall funding of the production.
The first time I heard, I think it's really interesting, the first time I heard about that was Disney commissioning 13 episodes and only taking receipt of 12 of them, and the other one was funding. And that's so important, again, because I don't know if any of the producers in the room have had that experience where there's an expectation to deliver a lot of assets to whatever your platform is, whoever your distributor is, and they're expensive. And
they're not funded.
They're not funded. And we have, there's some other issues in Canada around what's tax creditable around them, but I love that there's acknowledgement now for the cost of all that extra material that's required.
Well, it also stops made for digital content from being siloed away from linear, as if it's a separate beast. They overlap, they cross over, maybe the windowing, the monetization is different, rights, angles, etc. have to be addressed, but it's all part of the broader story world and different devices, yeah.
We're still very behind, though, globally, based on how our industry is structured. And so I think it is these working with screenwriters and has been helping us really think beyond basic funding models that are based on linear television, and having some innovative ways of getting around that. But there is a movement, but it's taking some time, and we're hoping that this is going to be one solution that will help us be able to have more flexibility with how the money is spent.
But I'm not sure in European funding situations whether a return on investment is measured only by money or also by reach or audience or discoverability? Does anyone have experience with that from recent applications for funding or dealing with broadcast funders or streamers in originals? Is there any value given to qualitative ROI rather than just money? If you have any comments, you can raise them after in the Q&A or now. But it's quite innovative, certainly for Canada. What's the vision going forward then? What do you see, because you just finished this pilot?
Yeah, and we're hoping the pilot renews for next year. We have one funder already in for next year, but so the vision really, the big, hairy, audacious goal for this platform is that this becomes the go-to platform for audience development. So the other thing that I want to build on here is a strategy development tool so that we can make it faster and easier for producers or their agencies to build really effective and actionable audience development plans. The other thing I'm super excited about is we're doing the largest ever study into measuring qualitative data, so measuring the impact of screen content. We're working with OCAD University in Toronto.
What's that? Okay.
OCAD University is a polytechnical university with former president, Dr. Sarah Diamond, who is a big brain in data analytics and visualizations. She's actually spearheading this project. And we're developing a suite of tools. I've just seen their first draft, actually. It's very impressive. It's a suite of tools that will be available to help producers measure impact. So there's a survey component, there's kind of like a virtual focus group component, there's a social media listening component that helps rank all those other ways. Like Jolie's project, Coded, it was incredible what she created for her budget and won 30 awards or something because it's so phenomenal. That matters. I mean, that matters to Canadian funders. I think that, of course, the numbers are paramount, but the qualitative data matters as well. So we're incorporating those tools into ScreenMiner in 2023. And really the immediate opportunity, the immediate vision is to find producers, funders, and platforms internationally to see if we can replicate the success that we're starting to see in Canada.
And just going back to Coded for a minute, it's not about coding, but maybe it's a useful one because it impacts drama. Can you maybe explain what coded means? Because it's not something that we have in Europe, where you're coding, you're labeling children. Can you explain a little?
Yeah, that was actually something that came up for us, is that maybe it wasn't the best title for the show, but the reason it was called Coded was because it was based on a teacher teaching kids who had emotional behavioral disorders in Alberta, and they used to have a coding system. So kids that were suffering with a certain issue, they would give them a number, and it was a sort of a way to address internally how to help support that child. But of course, they've since banned that system because they realized it was a horrible way of actually identifying children. That was the reason it was called Coded.
But then there was an impact. Did things change after that a little bit? They removed this system, this coding system?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually really interesting. We heard from a lot of teachers. That were able to really relate to the content. It was very interesting.
And what about the, in the international sector, what about streamers? I mean, are you working with streamers in Canada?
We're just starting to, yeah. I think there's an opportunity. I mean, a lot of the larger streamers and even some of the small and medium-sized streamers seem to have good data for, and with fast channels, they seem to have good data for, because they have to do rev share and track that data. But again, it's the marketing piece. It's how do you see, I think fast channels are really interesting, an interesting possibility for ScreenMiner, because rather than working at the project level, you know, there's organizations launching many fast channels, and they're building websites for them, and they're doing marketing for those channels. And I think there's an interesting play, because if you can get in early and start, as soon as you start gathering data, the better. Because you imagine a year from now, if you can see across your fast channels which genre are performing the best, what marketing channels are performing the best to build that viewership. as that universe explodes, those that are in early and have that deep understanding of their audience, I think will have an advantage. So we're looking at that now. And digital platforms is sort of similar, although in that case, they're interested in projects more than, because it's usually just one channel.
Right. But specifically in Canada, there would be an SVOD or an AdVOD that is doing this? Is it?
We've just signed our first one. We're doing that as sort of a test case as well.
Okay, so we can't say the name yet. Okay,
Yeah, I
sorry.
can't reveal the
Yeah,
name
that's
yet, but
fine.
yeah, that's in play.
No, because depending on the streamer, it's not always something that they want to share, but that's important to know. I wondered if there's any questions right now while you're here, if there's any questions you want to ask to any of the panelists. We have a couple of minutes for questions. And yeah.
I have a question. I'm an actor and I do a lot of voices for cartoons, things like that. I'm developing my own projects. And I'm wondering, this sounds amazing, but is this something that, I also am American, so is this something that is accessible for me or something that I should strive toward? I'm not sure how to, it's all amazing. And this has been a great panel, by the way.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here.
So I just wonder how to apply it in terms of me, a very tiny potato in a large field.
We like tiny potatoes. Are you thinking though for your personal brand, or are you thinking for your shows?
I think both, actually.
Both. Yeah,
Because
personal
it
brand.
ties together,
Yeah.
certainly because social media following, and then how can you say, people already follow me, so now look at my other projects.
Yes.
All of that.
That's just that.
So, I'll maybe address that two different ways. On our agency side, we represent some celebrity talent in Los Angeles, and we literally have gone, we should do it every week, we don't do it every week. We go to every platform, we check the following, and we map it. So just for that personal brand, even though you're not reporting maybe to a funder or some kind of other entity, just the idea of being able to stop that manual tracking and to aggregate, it works really well. There would be too many features, like you don't need to use them all for your personal brand. And in terms of being a small potato producer, absolutely, we've got small potatoes and big potatoes on the platform. We welcome them all, and it is accessible.
Super.
Yeah, we've got some pilot users actually in Los Angeles and New York right now.
I'm in Los Angeles and New York.
Well, we can definitely talk. You're probably wondering about pricing. As Agnes said, the funders in Canada are paying for the licenses right now. So for the last couple of years, we've just said as many projects as you can onboard, because we want to get that deep database. When the database is deeper, we can really start drilling into those benchmarks. So we're happy to have projects on. They typically come on for a 2-year license. We're thinking about making that a longer license because we want to see the long tail. I think there's a lot of learning there. So that's the model in Canada right now. What we're hoping to move towards is a project-based pricing system. So each project would probably pay an upfront 24-month license or 36-month license, because it's not like a business where your budgets refresh. So and we're just sorting out all of that pricing now. The pricing model fluctuates based on how many projects are being onboarded. So the cost to a funder is going to be based on how many projects are onboarding. When we move to just the straight project base, it'll probably end up being a very small fraction of 1% of your production budget. I mean, the amount of money, this is what slays me. We put $1.1 billion in Canada of funding to support original programming. Can we put 0.1% to track the audience ROI on that? Like, when you actually start looking at these numbers, it's ridiculous that we're not doing it, right? It is staggering.
Well, and then it's just having a movement where it's an acceptable production cost. Because of course there's, depending on who's funding it, I mean, we accepted it, the Rocket Fund, we have for years, but certain funds don't. So it's just a matter of getting that movement. So ideally, right now we're helping our producers, and then we like then to have it as part of the production funding.
I'm also thinking, we work a lot with producers' unions, rep groups, like for example in Canada, the CMPA, or the Dutch ones in Holland, where they aggregate 50 or 100 or 500 producers. Those types of organizations can also support this type of approach instead of it being individually out of your pocket. And that's probably the next phase once this pilot result crosses over.
Yeah, those organizations are really important because let's face it, this is a massive learning curve. For producers to now have to start dealing with data, even though there's a huge benefit, there is a massive learning curve, and so we're trying to support this also with education. We've gone back and forth across the country, again, supportive of funders and organizations in Canada to try to help producers, think through the process, learn the process of how to create an effective and targeted audience development plan. But I think that goes right around the world. I think there's an education that needs to happen. We can't expect producers to suddenly wake up one day and be marketeers or understand this data. So.
But on the other hand, like we work a lot with sales agents or distributors, having this data is really helpful when you're trying to sell the project somewhere else, and being able to refer to not only a rating in a local country, but the actual take-up and the audience composition.
Being able to show domestic success, yeah, and that's another reason why I think it's really important for producers to be able to have some agency over this data themselves, because they haven't had necessarily that data to take to a sales agent. And there's there's a bit of an education side, I think, even with some distributors. Full respect to those who are distributors who put up their hands. But to think that that there's any value in this data, and I see that changing a lot. We've had distributors reach out to us actually to ask about working with the platform.
And Jolie, as a producer, because you were the guinea pig, so to speak, one of the guinea pigs, did you get were there surprises? Were there things you didn't expect that came out from this experience? Was there a big surprise working with it?
Yeah, I've tracked this project from the beginning, and it's been such a huge learning curve. And now I get really excited about the data because I can get really granular with one of the things sometimes is when you're making something and you want to compare it to another show, and you don't always have the ability to really do that. And now I can find content that's relative to the content that I'm producing and create benchmarks and see how they're performing versus. You can really get into the data and learn so much about your audience.
What does that mean? Can you give an example? What do you mean by benchmarking against other? Yeah.
Okay, so even, for example, certain words that you might use to tag your show, I've learned that the most obvious word for my show was not the word that drove the most audience to my show. And it was, and I'm not talking by a small amount, I'm talking teacher.
Yeah,
My show's about a teacher.
The campaign that's running right now, that ad set, you can see.
Unbelievable.
And it was or was not?
No, the word teacher
was irrelevant.
was not what drove the audience. It was the word drama.
And you saw the trailer too, right? That one there was two trailers
How
that
I
were running.
labeled my trailer. One was a teacher trailer, and one was called the coded drama trailer,
drama, yeah.
and that was the one that had the word drama, and it drove the most amount of audience, and it was exponential.
Now that's
so
there.
That's a huge eye opener for
In
me.
fairness, that data was there. Just go in and look at your Facebook. But you got to drill really deep. We've got an agency that I've got experts in paid media, and they go in and they would report that back. But for a producer to go in, you can go into some of these analytics platforms and never come out. And so to see it, just to see it visualized and laid out in front of Jolie, it's amazing.
So then from a funder, I would just jump in and say that what's exciting for us is the whole point of a producer having control. And the world's fragmented, and the audience is fragmented, and you can't rely on one platform to help you have success. So giving the producer the ability to have the tools and the resources to work with their audience and be able to find their audience was key for us as a funder.
It's really empowering as a producer. I feel like, wow, I understand audience engagement and my audience so much better than I ever did, which is weird when you think about being a content creator. You're creating content so that you can find, for your audience. but it was such a big missing part before, so.
I gotta say, I had a television production company for 15 years. I never thought about the audience. The audience was, the audience was the buyer in front of
The
me, which was
business-to-business
the
audience.
commissioner, right? It was a B2B, we're like, almost like wholesalers. It was a B2B play. And that's who I sold to. So that's what I mean. I had the sharpest learning curve in our company.
Yeah, our producer's sharpest learning curve was they didn't get the money because they didn't give us an audience development plan. Which is true, we actually do, it's a big part of how we fund, because especially in kids, you really need to be able to go out quickly with your content and find your audience. So, and you know, our goal is to support as many producers as we can, but the reality is that if they don't come not just with the great content, but they don't come with a plan, then it really does not make sense for us to be involved anymore, because there's just so much competition for audience and money.
And how do you define kid in your fund? Is it like preschool or all the way up till teenage, or, you know, millennial, like
We do 18 and under.
18 and under?
Yeah, with content.
If anyone has any questions, I just want to introduce our team. Michelle Hubner is our customer success manager for our English side, and Stephanie Bono is customer success in Montreal on our French side, if anyone has any questions after the fact.
I still struggle to understand what is the difference between what you do and what some social media aggregators are doing, like Hootsuite or Sprout Social. And also my second question is, some of the platforms are blocking third parties from accessing the data, like Facebook, in order to bring them to their own management data platforms. How are you getting around all that?
Good question.
Yeah, great question. So the first one, Hootsuite and those aggregators, they deal with social media. They're not customized for they deal with social media alone, and they're not customized for the sector. So the main difference is, there's definitely some overlap. Like we do bring in social media data, but then we also bring in Google Analytics, and we bring in YouTube, and we bring in Vimeo, and we allow you to add additional, it can be even manual inputs, whether it's streaming data or, as I said, CSV data. So it goes well beyond what those platforms aggregate. We're not a publishing platform, so one of Hootsuite's primary purposes is for publishing, right? And we don't publish, enable you to publish social media. Plus, when you set your project up, you add a lot of metadata, which enables our filtering and the benchmarks that Jolie was talking about. So that's completely different than, and I think that's because of our deep roots in the sector. You know, I've been in the sector for 30 years, so it's very customized for screen. And in terms of the APIs are changing all the time, but we're not looking, even though we have a lot of data coming in, we are not blocked at this point by any of the platforms. It hasn't hurt us in terms of the data we're bringing in. And you also start to enjoy a certain relationship with those platforms where you have access to data that's not, I mean, Facebook changes their APIs every 5 minutes, right? And their platform, they've cut back so much what you're able to see. It's really frustrating as users, but yeah, we're able to, I mean, if they turn the fire hose off, would we have a problem? Absolutely. In Hootsuite, you see Facebook, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not there. But there's so many other platforms that would be struggling, and it doesn't really behoove them to go to the point of turning off the fire hose altogether, because they all are still competing for users, and they want people using it for business, and they certainly they want the money from ads, right? So the ad data is amazing that we get from them.
Well, maybe it's a good time to wrap up and allow 5 minutes around at the end, just informally, one-on-one, if you have questions to people, but you don't want to say in front of the whole room. We're lingering around, and